Hi, in this video we're going to be having an examination of Minnelied by Heinrich Hoffmann, which is a very beautiful piece. That's a love song, and it's the B1 piece on the grade 5 syllabus. So if you love playing beautifully expressive romantic music, then this is definitely a piece for you. And if you've not come across Heinrich Hoffmann before, well, there's a little bit of information about him down at the bottom of the page. A German composer, a pianist. He had a background singing as a boy in a cathedral choir and then went on to study from there. And certainly very much known for his keyboard music. And Schumann is mentioned here, which is interesting because it's very much in the style of Schumann, but sometimes you find that some composers are a bit overshadowed by other composers who are deemed to be greater in some way. So maybe it's one of those situations where you think, well, maybe if people like Schubert and Schumann had not lived, well, maybe somebody like Hoffmann would have been much more of a household name, a much more famous composer. Who knows? But I mean, it's good that Schumann and Schubert did live. I'm not suggesting they shouldn't have done. But Hoffmann wrote some very beautiful music, and this is a prime example. So I hope lots of people are going to learn this piece and really enjoy it. Let's start to unpack what's going on in his love song. Well, it's in ternary form. We've talked about quite a few pieces in ternary form on this course, but just so we know what we're talking about, it's got 3 sections. We call the first section A, then we have a contrasting B section in the middle of the piece, and then we come back to the A section again. And in a ternary form, the A section at the end might be an exact repeat of the original A section, or it might be that it's been changed in some way. Now, it's a bit of a mixture here because in this case, we get exactly a repeat of the A section all the way until bar 40, and then we kind of break into it. And from the end of bar 41, we have something we call a coda, which is just a kind of closing section. So the first A section obviously starts at the beginning. The B section starts on the last note of bar 16. So that's where we go off somewhere else for a bit. And then it kind of builds up to a bit of drama towards the end of the B section, which we'll talk about later. And before it starts to subside again. And then you notice in bar 33, it says rit, so gradually slowing down. And then it says a tempo at the end of 33. And that's where the A section restarts. And then, as I say, it's exactly the same as it was before until bar 40. And then after that, we go into this coda. So it's just a little change at the end of 40, 41, 42, and then we go into the coda. So that's the overall structure of the piece. Now let's dig down a little bit and see what's happening inside each of those sections. So at the beginning we have a 2-bar phrase and it goes like this. So that's the first phrase. It kind of leaves you a bit in the air, doesn't it? But that's how the first phrase goes. Then we have a second phrase, also 2 bars long, that goes. Now, can you hear that those 2 phrases kind of really belong to each other? The melody is different between the first and the second, but the rhythm is exactly the same. The way the music is organized is just the same. You know, you've got these quavers, 8th notes in the bass part. You've got all this activity going on in the middle. But the first 2-bar phrase kind of poses a musical question. The second 2-bar phrase kind of gives you an answer. Do you hear that? Oh, here's a question. It's not the end of anything, but here's the answer. Ah, we're now back home. So do you see how that goes? So when you play it, it's good to think about, well, how long is the phrase? So I know that for a start. But is this a phrase that sort of sits in its own right? Or actually, do we get a pair of phrases that belong together? Like, is the second one a repeat of the first one or an echo of the first one? Or do we get this idea of question and answer? Or to use posh words, antecedent and consequent. So you can really impress your friends by asking them how they're getting on with their antecedent and consequent phrases. That will impress them. But that's what's going on there. So the idea, the antecedent, is it's taking us somewhere, and then the consequent here is bringing us back home. So we get a sense of kind of maybe growing through that first bit and then coming back during the second bit. You see, there are different ways you can express that. Okay, now where do we go next? End of bar 4, we get another 2-bar phrase. So we get this. Which again kind of leaves us a bit in the air, doesn't it? And then we have another phrase that starts at the end of bar 6, another 2-bar phrase. And you see that sort of lends itself to a little bit of a slowdown at the end of that phrase, maybe. What do you think? Because if you think about the kind of 4 2-bar phrases we've had so far, what's gone on? Well, we've had, like, if we call the first one phrase 1, and then we've got phrase 2, they're kind of related to each other in the way that we described. And then we've had phrase 3, phrase 4 kind of related to each other, but they're nothing to do with the first 2 phrases. Have a look at what happens now. When we get to the end of bar 8, we have another 2-bar phrase. What do we notice about it? Oh, hang on a moment. Isn't this a repeat of the very first phrase? Oh, then there's another 2-bar phrase. Oh, isn't this a repeat of the second phrase? Oh, so it is. And then we wander off in a different direction. So what's happening now? We get another 2-bar phrase. So the 2-bar phrase that we haven't heard before, going in a new direction, and then a closing 2-bar phrase. Okay, so you see lots of 2-bar phrases, but you're beginning to see how they relate to each other. And that idea that, oh, the first bit comes back again at the end of bar 8. So we have a kind of first bit, then we go somewhere else, we come back to the first bit, then we go somewhere else that's not the same as the somewhere else we went to before. So you begin to feel the musical journey of the big A section. Now, some people might want to argue, well, is it really all these 2-bar phrases, or are some of those 2-bar phrases 4-bar phrases? Well, I think personally they are 2-bar phrases, but some of those 2-bar phrases come as a pair. So it's getting a sense of that. But just by understanding how that phrase structure works, you can be thinking, what does that kind of mean for how I play it? It tells us something about where we might want to crescendo and diminuendo, how we shape the phrases. It might tell us something about a bit of rubato, being a little bit free with the tempo. We want to be rhythmic, we want to know what the pulse is, but there are times here, especially in this very romantic style, when we could be a little bit flexible. We could slow down at the end of a phrase, then we could get going again. There are times when we're thinking, we're off to a new place. It's going to feel a bit more urgent. Like, for example, that bit at the end of bar 12, when it takes off into that new phrase there, and the key changes, and there's a crescendo. Well, do you see, it's kind of pushing us forwards, that phrase, isn't it? So it's got a kind of element of urgency about it. So we might slow down at the ends of some phrases, but we might want to be kind of more urgent about that. You know, when we have that bit where the first phrase comes back again, when we get to the end of bar 8, well, we might want to prepare for that at the beginning of bar 8. So in that case, the phrase before from the end of bar 6 might do this. You can slow down and then go back to speed again, because now we're kind of painting the fact that we're reclaiming the opening. Doesn't say to do that in the music, but in a way, if you play that strictly in tempo, you kind of lose the magic of it, and you lose kind of the ability to kind of get the audience to hear, that slowdown is preparing me for something. What's it preparing me for? Oh, we're going back to the beginning. So some places where you want to push on because it's more urgent, like going to that bit we talked about in bar 13. Other places you might want to slow down in order to prepare us for something, like we've just looked at in bar 8. I'm not saying you should play it like that. I'm not saying you have to play it like that. There are other ways in which you could bring it off. But what I am saying is, if you understand the phrase structure and how everything works, it gives you musical ideas, which is great. Okay, now then, the B section begins, as we said, at the end of bar 16. So what's happening now? Well, guess what? More 2-bar phrases. So that's a rather nice one, isn't it? We've got some really colourful things going on there. But that's another phrase that leaves us a bit in midair. Then we have another 2-bar phrase. Let me just turn the page. And then, so there we are. That's the end of the next 2-bar phrase. Then we have another 2-bar phrase. And then another 2-bar phrase. Okay, so you see a whole series of 2-bar phrases, and some of them you're feeling, ooh, that feels a bit more intense, like that last one we've just done. You know, you can feel it in the chords, can't you? That F natural is a bit sinister, isn't it? And then suddenly it's forte, and we have this kind of central climax of the piece, different kind of music. You know, he's kind of changed what he's doing. It's kind of like much more kind of block chords, you know, both hands, thick chords, all working together. All the semiquavers suddenly evaporate. Now we have a slightly longer phrase, a sort of 3-bar statement, starting at the end of 24. So that's quite dramatic, isn't it? And then we have another phrase that's one of the longest, well, the longest phrase in the whole piece, that starts at the end of bar 26, end of 27. And it starts the same way as the previous phrase, but then it extends. So see what happens here at the end of 27. So repeating, which kind of makes it even more dramatic, doesn't it? It's kind of re-emphasizing. But then you think, ooh, where are we going now? We're not finishing as we did before. We're carrying on. And then it's kind of evaporating, isn't it? The diminuendo. And then we get this rather beautiful chord with a writ. And the end of that phrase comes there. That's right at the end of the B section, because now we're going back to the A section. So that writ is there to help us paint the end of the B section, so we feel that structural point. And also that rather beautiful stuff going on with the F natural in the right hand, having had the D sharp in the previous bar. D sharp and then F natural. They're kind of rather expressive notes that you can enjoy a lot. And then we go back to the A section. Okay, well, we said it was the same to bar 40, so we've got 2, 2, 2, and then we've got 2 there as well. So, so end of bar 30, we're coming into this 2-bar phrase. And then we've got the coda, 2-bar phrase. Notice that little bom, bom, bom just put on the end. That's rather beautiful, isn't it? So that starts at the end of 41 and takes us almost to the end of bar 43. And then we have another 2-bar statement at the end of 43. And can you hear how those 2 phrases belong to each other in the coda? The first one from the end of 41. Then this kind of answers it. They're a lovely pair of phrases, aren't they? And then we have a short 1-bar statement from the end of 43, 4, 5, end of 45, which is based on the end of the previous thing, isn't it? And then 2 bars to finish, where we're really kind of settling down with this chordal finish. And you notice towards the end there, how we're painting this poco a poco, più lento, little by little, more slowly. Okay, so gradually getting slower and slower towards the end, so you can really spread that out. And there'll be a lovely atmosphere by the time you get to the end. You'll be playing quietly, you'll have slowed down to the end, you'll have paced those last 3 chords very carefully, and then you'll be holding on to that last note with that pause, for quite some time probably. And when you've finished, lift your hands and the pedal at the same time, but just lift off the keys and hold the atmosphere for a moment. So there's a kind of bit of magic in the silence. And then very slowly, you can put your hands down. You don't want to get to the end, have either sort of jump off the keys or get to the end and just hold it nice and steady for a moment. They go, oh, glad that's over, because then you suddenly break the atmosphere. It's too much of a shock. So come out of the atmosphere gradually, and then you'll really frame the performance most musically. So that will be lovely. Okay, so quite a bit to think about there, isn't there, with the overall structure and then the internal phrase structure of the piece. Okay, now I'm going to talk to the teachers for a moment about chords and keys. Stick with us for this if you want to, or if you're thinking, no, that's all a step too far from me, well, have a little breather and then come back and join us in a mo. So we're starting in A major. Obviously, we've got an anacrusic start. We're starting on the last quaver, the last eighth note there, and the anacrusis pattern plays out quite a lot during the piece. Okay, so chord 1 for the anacrusis, into the first complete bar, 5/7 last inversion, going on quaver by quaver, eighth note by eighth note, 1 in first inversion, 5 in second inversion, 1 in root position. So just at those last 3 chords there in bar 1 is a kind of passing 6/4 going on. 1 first inversion, 5 second inversion, 1. Bar 2, 5/7 in first inversion. The D sharp is just a chromatic lower auxiliary in the right hand, so it's not a modulation to E or anything, that's all it is, chromatic decoration. End of the bar, 5/7 root position. Bar 3, 5/7 first inversion to 5/7 last inversion, then 1B, then, 1 in first inversion, then 5 in second inversion at the end of that bar. Bar 4 is chord 1 until the last quaver, where it changes to 5/7 second inversion. Bar 5, 1 first inversion. And then the second half of that bar is really a kind of 1/7 second inversion. And then the beginning of bar 6, well, we're going on to chord 2 in A. There's a 4/3 appoggiatura going on at the top, in case you're wondering what that E is doing. So, you know, leaning on the appoggiatura and resolving onto the D is something that you want to talk to students about. This is 2 in A major, but it's also 1 in B minor. It's a pivot chord because the last quaver of 6 is a 5 second inversion in B minor. Then we go on in 7 to a chord 1 in B minor. And again, you've got this appoggiatura at the beginning with that C sharp. Then we get a chromatic 2/7 in the second half of 7. Why is it chromatic? Because it's got F natural instead of F sharp. So a nice bit of colour there. You notice the F sharp's going to F natural on the way to 5. So lovely kind of chromatic moment. Okay, beginning of 8 is 5 passing notes on the second quaver, then 5 in first inversion on the third quaver, then 1 for the last quaver of the bar. Bar 9, 5/7 last inversion, going to 1 first inversion, going to 5 second inversion, going to 1. So this is the same pattern as it was before, of course, because as we said, it's repeating these 2 phrases. So I won't go through that again because it's the same as bars 1 to 4. When we move on to bar 13, interesting moment here. We've had a hint of D sharp in the previous bar in 12, but in 12 it's a chromatic lower auxiliary note, that D sharp. When we move forwards into 13, the D sharp becomes a harmony note, so something's happening. And we're modulating to E major, so it seems anyway, because this is a 5/7 in last inversion in the key of E that takes up the whole of that bar. So we're sort of expecting that to go to 1 in E. Well, when you come to bar 14, there's a sort of E major chord. So you get the sense of 5/7 going to 1 in E, but then you get the D natural thrown at it. And the D natural turns it from a 1 in E to a 5/7 in the key of A. So quite a clever little touch there, isn't it? That you get that 5/7 in E going to 1 in E, but because we've got D naturals in there, it's a 5/7 in A. We go to 1 in A on the third quaver of 14. So there we are, bit of colour of E major. And so we're back in A, so we think. Aha, the last quaver of 14 is an F sharp minor chord. So, okay, that's chord 6 in A, but it's also 2 in E, because then when you come to 15, can you see the bass going dominant, 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 tonic in E? You can also see we've got D sharps floating around. So we've got a little bit of decoration over the dominant, and then it's a kind of 5-9 on that third beat to a 5-7 to a 1 in E major. So we do get that modulation to the dominant key by the end of the section. I love the way he kind of hints at it, backtracks to A, but then comes back to E again. Just keeps you guessing, doesn't it? When we go into the B section, we're kind of going straight into B minor. You see those D naturals and A sharps are suddenly with us. So in 17, there's an accented passing note in the right hand at the beginning of the bar, but it's all 5-7 beyond that. And then in the next bar, so this is 18, it's a 5-9 now, kind of second inversion, and then it goes to sort of 5 at the end of the bar. Well, yeah, it's an interesting one. It just need to be clear about keys here. So when I say the 5-9 here, that's a 5-9 in the key of E, going to 1 in the key of E at the end of 18. Okay, so we're on the move. We've had this hint of B minor, but now we're on the move again. When we come to the last bar of the page, well, this is a 5-9, but in the key of D, because you've got that G natural. So we're expecting it to go to the tonic of D at the beginning of the second page. But no, in bar 20, he says, let's have a 5-7 in first inversion in B minor. So, oh, we're back in B minor again, are we? Okay, that takes you through the bar. 21 is a 1 in B minor. Oh, we seem to be sticking in B minor. That's handy. And then as we go through 21, the third quaver is a 5-7 second inversion, then a 1 in first inversion. And just as you're happily getting used to B minor, we get into 22 and, oh, hang on a minute, this is a 5-7 first inversion in the key of E. Interesting. But then we have that C natural in the right hand. So is it 5-7 in E major or is it 5-7 in E minor? Oh, we're not quite sure, are we? But the beginning of the next bar, 23, is called 1 in E minor. So we do seem to be in E minor. Then that's there for the passing note in the melody on the second quaver. Then on the third quaver, 5-7 in second inversion, followed by 1 in E minor, first inversion at the end of the bar. But then as we cross over the bar line, there's a lovely touch where that G natural on the left hand becomes a G sharp. And you get this suddenly, the revelation that this is now a 5-7 first inversion in the key of A. And the lovely F natural as a chromatic upper auxiliary 2. So we've got this chord 5 in A. A major, we think, because that's the key. But that F natural has just made us think a little bit A major, A minor. What happens? Then we get these repeated dominants, like brass music suddenly comes in. So we're thinking, well, what is the tonic? Is it A major? Is it A minor? Second chord of 25, A minor. So it's called 1 in A minor, is it? Okay, so now we think, great, we're in A minor. Well, is it called 1 in A minor or is it called 4 in E minor? Interesting. The next chord, interestingly, is a 1 in second inversion, but it doesn't have a third in it. So we don't know if it's G sharp or G natural. He's done that on purpose. Then we go on to 26 and the next chord, well, that's A minor again in first inversion. So if we are in E minor, it's a 4 first inversion. Now, why do I say that? Because look at the next chord, which really makes it clear that we're not in A minor, because the last chord of 26 is an E minor chord. So E minor, chord 1, second inversion. 27 is still in E minor, is a 2-7 in first inversion. Then all this is just, a bit of decoration around that. And then we've got a repeat of these chords, so that's exactly the same as it was. And then we come to the last bar of the line, bar 30. We've got that 2-7 in first inversion again. And then when you go to 31, suddenly he kind of mutates that into this chord, which is a diminished seventh in the key of B. So, B major, B minor, what's going on? Well, the next bar, we're thinking, well, he's going to do B minor again, isn't he? But 32, he has a 4-3 in the top part to decorate it. But then it goes to 3, it goes to D sharp. So, it's B major we've gone to. But then, shock horror, 33, suddenly we've got this chromatically altered 2-7 in the key of A again. So that's quite a kind of dramatic moment. It's not entirely functional. B major, 2-7, B, 2-7 in that inversion in the key of A. It's last inversion. But chromatically altered with the F natural. And then it goes down to G sharp, which is kind of then saying, 5-7 in A. Okay, then we go back to A major. Beautiful modulation that, by the way. And then, as I said before, it's exactly the same until bar 40. Okay, so what happens in bar 40? Well, we have a 5-13 in the key of A, an accented lower auxiliary. At the end of that bar, 5-7-1 in A. Then the coda from the end of 41, 1 over the tonic pedal, notice. We're going 5-7-1, 5-1, 5-7 still over the tonic pedal. 4 second inversion at the end of 43. 44 is going 1, passing, 1, passing, 1 in the next bar. Then at the end of that bar, 5-13 to 1. 5-13 to 1. And then a lovely touch here where we get chord 6 followed by chord 1. Do you know a cadence that goes 6-1? I don't. But Hofmann's used one there. Rather lovely touch. You're really not expecting that. You think he's going to go 1, 5, 1, but he goes 1, 6, 1. So there's something to paint there, a little nuance, isn't there? Okay, well, I spent a bit of time with the teachers there talking about chords, keys, and what's going on in the piece, and they may well want to follow that up with you in terms of things you might want to know about for your interpretation. But if you're not into chords, as I say, really don't worry, because it's a bit complicated at this stage, and most people only really get into this kind of chord thing when they're doing their grade 6, 7 and 8 theory, which isn't everybody's cup of tea. Fair enough. Anyway, sometimes this chord key thing has an implication for how we play it. So, have a discussion with your teacher about that. Okay, other things we want to think about. This has got to be a really kind of legato piece. We want to lift at the ends of phrases, but there's not much in the way of staccato, is there? Little bit towards the end of the piece. You notice the right hand 43, da, da, dum, couple of bars later. And again, the bar after that. But apart from that, it's pretty legato stuff, isn't it? So make sure you've got really good connected legato. We're exchanging one note for the next. We're not chopping them up. Make sure we're not smudging one note into the next. So we've got lovely clarity. That's a really important thing just to think about. Interesting tempo marking. Andante, agitato. It almost feels like a contradiction, doesn't it? Andante, we sometimes translate that as walking pace. It's not the greatest translation, but it's kind of fairly gentle, isn't it? But agitato, agitated. Now, I think that means not kind of like play it dead fast. I think it means that there are moments of agitation, but the piece is full of passion because it's a love song. Now, that's a tricky business, isn't it? How do you paint a love song? Well, what is it to fall in love? Well, that's a tricky question, isn't it? One of the eternal questions for the entire history of humankind. But sometimes being in love is something absolutely wonderful and it's all red roses and chocolates. That's just like my marriage, really, most of the time. And sometimes it's a little bit turbulent, isn't it? We have our little disagreements or we feel really passionate about things. So what is happening in this piece is a bit of all of that. There are times when it's just beautifully serene. There are other times when it is a bit more agitato. So don't try and play the whole piece in one kind of mood, or in such a way that it's kind of you're playing the notes, but you don't really care about this. There isn't much kind of sense of what this love thing might be about. Try to get these different aspects of it. Very difficult thing to paint if you haven't been in love once or twice in your life, but maybe you've been in love many times and you are absolute experts in this. But anyway, even if that's not part of your experience yet, just sort of thinking, well, you know, what are the things in the music that feel as if they want to be a bit more agitated? Like, you know, this bit we talked about. You know, that's a passionate moment, isn't it? You know, going through that bit on the approach to bar 15, that's a really passionate moment. But the beginning is very intimate and tender. That's just something totally different, isn't it? So you get all these different moods. You get sort of dramatic moments on the second page. You know, this is really powerful stuff, isn't it? Love can be very powerful, you know? So we want to get the drama of that across. So lots of different moods that are coming across in the one piece. It's not a one mood piece. It's got all these moments of reflection and tenderness, all these moments of agitation and drama. So that word agitato, just something to bear in mind with that. Okay, so very legato, but lift at the ends of the phrases, shape the phrases. That's really important in this style. You know, get louder and quieter, just sort of feel, where is the music taking you? Is there a chord that you really want to enjoy or build towards? Do you want to slow down a little bit at the end of the phrase and then just maybe diminuendo a little bit? You know, that kind of stuff. Don't make it all too busy and nattery in the middle. I can hear people doing things like this. What's that got to do with a love song? Changes the mood entirely, doesn't it? So it's got to be very gently done. Do you see? You've got to be very careful and controlled about those semiquavers so they don't get all agitated on you. But painting all these lovely chords that you get. Now, there is some pedalling marks right at the end of the piece, right the last two chords, where you get pedal, pedal. Now, can you play the whole piece without the pedal? Of course you can, that's perfectly in order. And some people might think, yeah, that's the way I like it. If you do that, you're going to have to be really good with your finger legato. You may decide that even though there's pedal marked at the end, doesn't mean you can't use the pedal in a few other places. And personally, I'd be tempted to use pedal all the way through the piece. Okay, well, you can discuss that with your teachers. How do you know when to change the pedal if you're going to use the pedal? Well, it's a lot to do with how often do the chords change, how often does the melody change. So let me sort of give you an idea as to how I personally would pedal this piece. There are lots of different possibilities, but you might do this. Pedal, change, 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 off, pedal, change, 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 off, and so on. You get the idea. I'm going to be saying change in the middle of the night tonight, aren't I? But do you see what I'm trying to do there? I'm trying to demonstrate how you can do that in relation to when do the chords change, what's happening with the melody. Is there a rest where I need to get my foot out of the way? Otherwise, we're just going to blast through the rest, you know? And I mean, carrying on in the same kind of way. When you come to that climax that starts at the end of 24, well, you might want to start this without the pedal, just to make those trumpet calls really clear, and then pedal, change, 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 no pedal, pedal, change, 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 change. You see what I'm doing there? So we're just kind of reflecting the chord change and what's going on with things in the melody. Okay, so you might want to think about using some additional pedal in that piece. I'm not saying you have to, I'm not saying you should, I'm just saying you could. If you decide to do that, it might just add a bit of warmth and resonance to the sound. That could be an extra expressive touch, but you'll have to do it very carefully so it doesn't become something that gets in the way of the music. And then really do your best to project the melody at the top. There's also a sense in which there's a little bit of a duet going on. Now, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense if it's a love song, isn't it? Because, you know, if it's just one person, that's usually a bad sign because it just means they're in love with themselves, the kind of people who can be a bit difficult to deal with. So there's a bit of a love duet going on. So even though we've got a main tune at the top of this piece, here's our main tune. We've also got this other person down at the bottom. So there's a kind of love duet. Can you feel that love duet going on? So we can enjoy the duet between these two people. Feels very kind of intimate, that bit, doesn't it, as we said. So sometimes one person speaks and the other one hasn't got anything to say. That's how it goes sometimes. Sometimes they're speaking together, sometimes they're duetting together, sometimes they're going in the same direction as each other, sometimes they're going in slightly different directions. It's all part of a picture of love. So you might want to think about that when you're thinking about this thing we call the balance between the hands, between one part and another. So lots of things to think about in this piece, but I do think it is an absolutely gorgeous piece and well worth learning, but it's going to need lots of expression. So get right on top of all the technical things and then really work on those expressive things so that you can give a really wonderful, loving performance of this beautiful piece by Hoffmann.